The moment my sister said we should all go back home and that I would be fine, I was lying on a narrow hospital gurney in the emergency room in Columbus, Ohio, shaking from pain and trying not to throw up on myself. The ceiling lights slid past above me in slow motion, long white panels buzzing softly as the nurses rushed me down the hallway. My lower back and side felt like they were being crushed from the inside, a deep grinding pain that came in waves and stole the air from my lungs. I had been told only minutes earlier that a kidney stone was blocking my ureter and that an infection was already spreading. The doctor had leaned close to my face, his voice calm but serious, explaining that this was not routine and that I needed an emergency urology procedure right away. I nodded because nodding was easier than speaking. I trusted him. I always trusted doctors. I was a nurse myself. I knew when something was bad. I could hear voices just beyond the thin hospital curtain as they wheeled me into a holding area. My mom sounded worried at first, asking questions in that tight voice she used when she was scared but trying not to show it. My dad was quiet, clearing his throat the way he did when he did not know what to say. And then there was Lydia, my older sister. Her voice cut through the others, confident and irritated, like this was all an inconvenience that had been dropped into her lap at the worst possible time. She told them we should all go back home and that I would be fine. She reminded them that I was a nurse that I knew. These things happened, that doctors like to overreact. She talked about her wedding planning, about a dress fitting that afternoon, about a cake tasting she had already paid for, about how everything was scheduled and could not be moved around me. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my hands clenched into fists, listening to my life be discussed like a calendar problem. I waited for someone to argue with her. I waited for my mom to say no, this is serious, we are staying. I waited for my dad to speak up to say his younger daughter needed him. Instead, there was a pause, a long, uncomfortable pause, and then my mom sighed. She said Lydia was probably right, and that I was strong and would understand. My dad did not say anything at all. A nurse pulled the curtain back slightly and asked who would be staying to sign the paperwork and wait while I was taken in. No one answered her right away. I could feel the silence stretch. Then I heard footsteps moving away. My family left. All of them. They chose to go home and continue planning a wedding while I was prepped for emergency surgery. I did not cry. Not then. The shock came quietly, like something settling into place inside me. I realized at that moment that this was not a misunderstanding or bad timing. This was a decision. My sister had decided I was optional, and everyone else had agreed with her. Before I go any further, let me pause here for just a second. When you are listening to this story, where are you right now? Are you in your kitchen folding laundry? Sitting in your car winding down after a long day? For me, I was flat on my back under harsh hospital lights, listening to my own family walk away. The nurses moved quickly after that. They asked me to confirm my name, my date of birth, and my allergies. They explained what would happen next in calm, practiced tones. I answered automatically, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. Inside, something was breaking open. I had spent my whole life being the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who did not need much. I worked as a travel nurse, moving from hospital to hospital, taking the hardest shifts because someone had to. I was 33 years old and used to being alone. I thought I was fine with it. As they rolled me toward the procedure room, I felt a sudden wave of fear that had nothing to do with the surgery itself. It was the fear of waking up alone. I had seen that look on patients' faces so many times before, the quiet panic when they realized no one was coming for them. I had always told myself that would never be me. I had a family. I had a sister. I had parents. I was wrong. The anesthesiologist leaned over me and asked if I had any last questions. I almost asked him to wait just for a minute in case my family came back. I almost asked him if this could be delayed. But then I heard Lydia's voice again in my head, sharp and certain, telling everyone I would be fine. So I said no. I said I was ready. As the medication began to take effect, my thoughts drifted to how this day had started. I had woken up in my apartment in Columbus before dawn, curled around a pain in my side that felt like someone had driven a hot spike through me. I had tried to convince myself it was nothing, that it would pass. Nurses are terrible patients. We minimize everything. But when I started vomiting and could not stand up straight, I called for help. I called my mom from the ambulance, my voice shaking, telling her something was wrong. She had sounded concerned then. She had promised they would meet me at the hospital. I had believed her. Lying there now, waiting to lose consciousness, I replayed that promise over and over. I wondered when exactly it had been replaced by Lydia's schedule. I wondered when my pain had become less important than cake flavors and fabric, swatches. I wondered how many times before this had happened without me noticing. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was the beeping of a monitor and the feeling of a nurse squeezing my hand. She told me she would be there when I woke up. She kept her word. My family did not. When I opened my eyes again, hours later, the room was quiet. The procedure had gone well, the nurse said. They had placed a stent to relieve the blockage and started antibiotics to fight the infection. I was groggy and sore, my mouth dry, my body heavy. I turned my head, expecting to see someone sitting in the chair by the bed. The chair was empty. The nurse noticed me looking around and asked gently if my family had stepped out. I told her they had important things to do. She did not argue, but her expression softened in a way that made my chest ache. She adjusted my IV and asked if I needed anything else. What I needed was not something she could give me. When she left, I reached for my phone with unsteady fingers. I already knew what I would see, and somehow it still hurt. The family group chat was active. Lydia had sent pictures from her dress fitting, smiling in white satin, her hair perfectly styled. She talked about how magical everything felt, about how excited she was. My mom replied with hearts and told her to focus on her big day. There was no mention of me beyond a casual check-in hours later, asking how I was doing, followed by a laughing emoji. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I opened social media and saw Lydia's story posted right around the time I had been taken into surgery. She was standing in a bakery laughing, holding a tiny fork with a bite of cake on it. The timestamp made my stomach turn. That was when it clicked fully. This was not an accident. It was not poor communication. It was a choice. I locked my phone and set it face down on the tray. My hands were shaking now, not from pain but from something colder. I felt foolish for all the times I had told myself my family loved me in their own way. I felt angry at myself for accepting so little and calling it strength. And somewhere beneath all of that, I felt something else beginning to form. A quiet resolve. A sense that this moment mattered, and that what came next would change everything. I did not know yet what I was going to do. I only knew that I would never forget the sound of my sister's voice saying I would be fine while walking away from my hospital bed. And I knew with a clarity that surprised me that I was done pretending it did not hurt. That was the day my sister decided I was optional. And it was the day I started deciding what I would no longer accept. I woke up to the steady beep of a monitor and the low murmur of voices, somewhere down the hall. For a few seconds, I did not know where I was. My body felt heavy, like I was pressed into the mattress by something unseen. My mouth was dry, my throat raw, and there was a deep ache in my side that throbbed every time I took a breath. When I tried to move, pain bloomed and pulled me back into stillness. The recovery room was dim, lit by soft overhead lights meant to keep patients calm. Pale curtains separated the beds, but mine was pulled all the way closed. I turned my head slowly, scanning the room, expecting to see someone sitting in the chair beside me. Mom with her purse on her lap. Dad leaned back, arms crossed, pretending not to worry. Even Lydia scrolling on her phone, impatient but present. The chair was empty. The space beside my bed felt wider than it should have. A nurse noticed my eyes open and came over, smiling gently. She asked how I was feeling and told me the procedure had gone well. She explained that the blockage had been relieved and that they had started antibiotics to control the infection. I nodded, trying to focus on her words. When she finished, she glanced around the room and asked if my family had stepped out. I told her they had something important to take care of. The words came out easily, like I had said them 100 times before. She paused for just a moment, then nodded and adjusted my IV. She did not challenge me. She did not need to. There was something in her eyes that told me she understood more than I had said. She offered me a sip of water and reminded me to take slow breaths. Then she left, her footsteps fading down the hall. The curtains settled back into place and I was alone again. I lay there listening to the sounds of the unit. The distant squeak of shoes on linoleum. The rattle of a cart. A cough from somewhere behind another curtain. These were familiar sounds to me. I had worked in hospitals for years. I knew the rhythm of recovery rooms. I had comforted countless patients in beds just like mine. I had squeezed their hands and told them they were not alone. I had believed it when I said it. Now, staring at the empty chair, I realized how different it felt to be on this side of the bed. After a few minutes, I reached for my phone. My hand shook as I picked it up, and I had to steady it against the blanket. I told myself I was just checking the time. I told myself I was just making sure no one had tried to reach me. I already knew what I was going to see. The screen lit up with notifications. Messages stacked on top of each other in the family group chat. I opened it and scrolled slowly, my thumb moving almost on its own. Lydia had sent a picture from her dress fitting. She was standing on a small platform, white fabric draped perfectly around her, smiling wide at the camera. Her hair was clipped back, her makeup flawless. She wrote about how surreal it felt, how everything was finally coming together. A few minutes later, another message. She was on her way to a cake tasting and could not wait to try the chocolate option everyone had recommended. Mom replied with heart emojis and told her to focus on her big day. She said everything would be perfect. Dad reacted with a thumbs up. I kept scrolling. More updates from Lydia. She talked about timelines and appointments and how busy the afternoon was going to be. Then hours later, a short message asking how I was doing, followed by a laughing face. As if my surgery was an afterthought squeezed in between fittings and flavors. My chest tightened as I read. I felt a strange combination of numbness and clarity. This was not chaos or confusion. This was an organization. This was a priority. I closed the chat and opened social media. I did not want to, but I did it anyway. Lydia had posted a story earlier that afternoon. The image loaded slowly, then filled the screen. She was standing in a bright bakery, holding a small fork with a bite of cake on it, laughing with someone just out of frame. The timestamp sat quietly at the bottom of the screen. I checked the time. That was when I had been wheeled into the procedure room. That was when the anesthesiologist had told me to count backward. That was when my family had already decided to be somewhere else. Something shifted inside me then. It was subtle, not explosive. There was no sudden wave of tears or anger. Instead, a calm understanding settled in, heavy and unmistakable. This was not a mistake. No one had forgotten me. No one had been delayed by traffic or miscommunication. They had made a choice. Lydia had made it, and my parents had gone along with it. I locked my phone and set it back on the tray. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped. For a long time, I lay there and stared at the ceiling. I thought about how often I had explained things away from my family. How many times I had told myself they did the best they could. How often I had worn the label of being strong like armor, proud of the fact that I did not need much from anyone. Being strong has always meant being quiet. It meant not asking for help. It meant understanding when other people came first. I had learned that lesson early, and I had carried it with me into adulthood, into my career, into every relationship. I thought it made me resilient. I did not realize how convenient it made me. A different nurse came in to check my vitals. She asked if I was in pain and adjusted my medication when I said yes. She asked again if there was anyone she could call for me. I shook my head. It was easier than explaining. When she left the room, felt even quieter. I wondered what it would look like from the outside. A woman in her early 30s alone in a recovery bed, phone face down, no flowers, no jacket draped over the chair. I wondered if anyone passing by noticed. I wondered if they assumed I did not have anyone, or if they assumed I did not want anyone there. The truth was harder. I had people. They had just decided I was not important enough to stay. As the afternoon wore on, my phone buzzed a few more times. I did not pick it up. I knew it would be more of the same. More updates about dresses and cakes and plans. More reassurance that everything was fine. I did not have the energy to read it, and I did not have the words to respond. Instead, I focused on the physical sensations in my body. The ache in my side, the dryness in my mouth, the weight of the blanket. It grounded me in the present, kept my thoughts from spiraling too far ahead. I reminded myself that I was safe, that the procedure was over, that I would heal. What I did not remind myself of, what I could not yet say out loud, was that something else had been injured in that room, something that would not be fixed with antibiotics or rest. As evening approached, a doctor came by to explain the next steps. He told me I would likely stay overnight for observation. He spoke kindly and answered my questions. When he asked if I had support at home, I hesitated before saying yes. The word felt fragile, like it might crack if I pressed on it too hard. After he left, I finally picked up my phone again. I opened the family chat and typed a response. My fingers hovered over the screen for a long moment. I could tell them I was awake. I could tell them the procedure was over. I could tell them I wished they had stayed. I deleted the message without sending it. For the first time in my life, I did not rush to smooth things over. I did not reassure anyone. I did not make myself smaller to keep the peace. I let the silence sit where my words usually went. Outside my curtain, the unit continued on, indifferent to my thoughts. The nurses laughed quietly at the desk. A call light chimed. Life moved forward. Inside, I felt the edges of a new understanding taking shape. I did not know yet what it meant or where it would lead. I only knew that something had changed, and that pretending otherwise would only hurt me more. I turned my phone face down again and closed my eyes, letting the room fade slightly out of focus. There would be time to think about what came next. For now, it was enough to acknowledge the truth I had seen clearly for the first time. I had woken up alone, and that I was beginning to realize was not the worst part. The worst part was how familiar the feeling was, like slipping into a coat I had worn all my life without ever noticing how heavy it really was. The room was quiet again, that strange hospital quiet where every sound feels amplified. A monitor beeped in a steady rhythm. Carts rolled somewhere in the hallway. Voices drifted faintly from behind curtains. I watched the window as the color of the sky shifted, the late afternoon light softening into something pale and muted. It felt like time was moving without me. I lay still and let my thoughts move backward, not in a straight line but in fragments, memories rising like small waves, each carrying something I had ignored, dismissed or softened for years. The first one was my high school graduation. I remembered the feel of the cap digging into my forehead and the sticky heat of early June in Ohio. I had been excited, nervous, hopeful. I watched my classmates pose for pictures with parents who had arrived early, holding bouquets or signs with their names. I kept glancing at the entrance, waiting for my family. They came in just as my row stood to walk to the stage. Mom smiled like nothing was wrong. Dad patted my shoulder. Lydia said she had an appointment that morning and traffic was a nightmare. I told them not to worry. I told myself they tried their best. Then came my nursing school graduation years later. Another ceremony. Another sea of caps and gowns. Another late arrival. Lydia had spilled something on her dress and needed Mom to help replace it before the ceremony. Dad said he did not want to come without Mom and Lydia. I walked the stage alone while my classmates waved at their families and blew kisses. I saw my parents slipping into their seats near the very end. Afterward, Mom hugged me and said she knew I did not mind because I had always been strong. That word again, strong. I shifted slightly, careful of the soreness in my side. The IV line tugged gently against my arm. I reached for my phone and tapped the screen, watching the family group chat open like a window into the past. I scrolled slowly this time, not looking for new messages, but for old patterns. There it was, repeating itself like a chorus in a song I had never realized I had been listening to. She will be fine. She always handles things. She is strong. There were hundreds of small examples. Days when I was sick and asked for someone to pick up groceries. Mom told me I rested better when I was alone. Lydia said she was exhausted from her own workload. Dad sent a thumbs-up emoji, the digital version of silence. When I sprained my wrist lifting a patient during one of my assignments, I called home because the pain scared me. I thought I might need help for a few days. Lydia texted that she wished she could come, but she had plans with her friends. Mom said I knew how to handle injuries since I was in healthcare. Dad said nothing at all. I scrolled further. When Lydia broke up with a boyfriend in her 20s, the family rearranged everything to help her. My parents drove to her apartment that same night. Dad fixed a cabinet door that had been loose for months. Mom cooked her meals for the week. I drove over after a 12-hour shift to keep her company. Lydia cried into my shoulder and whispered that she did not know how to be alone. No one ever asked me if I knew how. The more I read, the more the memories sharpened. None of these moments had felt dramatic when they happened. They had been small, manageable, easy to excuse. I told myself it was not a big deal. I told myself everyone was busy. I told myself Lydia needed more support, that Mom worried more about her because she was the older daughter or because she was sensitive. But here in this bed, freshly out of an emergency procedure with no one beside me, those excuses felt thin. I clicked out of the messages and opened my photos. Pictures from old holidays showed Lydia in the center, my parents close to her, me off to the side. Not because anyone forced me there, but because I had learned instinctively to take the space no one else wanted. Birthdays, Thanksgivings, vacations. The story was always the same. Lydia in the spotlight, me in the wings. I closed the photos and let the phone rest on my stomach for a moment. My heart ached in a way that had nothing to do with infection. I had spent years telling myself this dynamic was harmless. That being the dependable one was something to be proud of. That was a compliment. That needing less made me easier to love. But strength without support is not strength. It is survival dressed as virtue. The curtain rustled, and a nurse stepped into the room. She checked my vitals, asked if I was feeling nauseated, and reminded me to keep the water within reach. She asked again if there was anyone she should call. Her tone was kind but cautious, like she was trying not to press too hard. I shook my head with a practiced smile. She nodded, her eyes softening with something like understanding, and left. As soon as she walked away, my smile dropped. I picked up the phone again and reopened the group chat. I studied the phrasing in each message, the tone, the rhythm of how my family spoke about me. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. Every time I had been ignored, it was because they thought I could handle it. Every time Lydia needed something, they responded immediately because they believed she could not. I was reliable, so I was deprioritized. She was fragile, so she was cherished. The realization was a quiet one, but it hit deeper than anger. It was clear. The kind that does not burn but freezes. I opened my notes app. My fingers hovered above the keyboard before I finally began typing. Graduation. Missed events. Flu. Back injury. Overnight shifts. Breakups. Family dinners. Holidays. The emergency tonight. I listed everything without adding emotion. Just facts, dates, times, what was said, what was done, what was not done. It felt like building a timeline of a story I had been telling wrong. At one point, I paused staring at a single line I had typed without thinking. Lydia told Mom I would understand. They always say I will understand. I closed my eyes. I remembered all the times I had been given that role. The understanding one, the easy one, the steady one. I had worn those qualities like badges, believing they reflected dignity and maturity. I had not realized they also gave my family permission to overlook me. I scrolled back in the chat, stopping on a message from Dad sent during a holiday years ago. Lydia had canceled plans last minute, and my parents had panicked. Dad wrote that Lydia was overwhelmed and they needed to be there for her. When I had offered to help, Dad responded with a short, "She will be fine." That was all. 3 small words. But they had shaped my place in that moment and in countless others. Now, lying in a dim hospital room with the ache of infection pulsing in my side, I finally understood what those words really meant. She does not need us. She can be last. My chest tightened. I thought of how many times I had downplayed my own needs to keep the peace. How many times I had stayed quiet to make things easier for them. How many times I had believed I was lucky to be strong. I lifted my phone again and added one final line to the note. Do not let them rewrite this later, because I knew exactly how it would go once I saw them again. Lydia would say she had not realized how serious it was. Mom would insist she thought I preferred being alone. Dad would say he stayed quiet because he did not want to make things worse, and I out of habit would be tempted to accept their version, to smooth it over, to be understanding. But for the first time in my life, I did not trust myself to remember this pain accurately unless I recorded it. I knew how easily I bent backward to justify their decisions. How quickly I talked myself out of feeling hurt. My own history has trained me to minimize my needs. Not this time. I saved the note. It was not a plan. It was not revenge. It was simply truth captured before I could talk myself out of it. Outside the window, the hallway lights dimmed as evening settled deeper into the building. The sound of a rolling cart drifted closer, then past. Somewhere a phone rang at the nurse's station. Inside, something steadied in me. A quiet shift, subtle but irreversible. I did not yet know what I would do with this new clarity. I only knew that the story of who I was and my family had cracked. And once something cracks, it can take a new shape. I placed the phone face down beside me and closed my eyes, letting my breathing fall into a slow rhythm. The pain was still there, but it felt cleaner, somehow less tangled. It was mine, and I was done pretending it was anything else. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more decisions, more truth I would need to face. But for now, I let the room settle around me quiet and dim, and allowed myself to sit in the uncomfortable but honest realization that had been unfolding piece by piece. The pattern I had spent years excusing was finally visible, and I could never unsee it now. I placed the phone face down beside me and closed my eyes, letting my breathing fall into a slow rhythm. The pain was still there, but it felt cleaner somehow, less tangled. It was mine, and I was done pretending it was anything else. The next morning came early, with sunlight pushing its way past the blinds and a tech gently waking me for labs. The routine of the hospital settled around me. Vital checks, medication, the quiet shuffle of the morning shift. By mid-morning, I was cleared to go home, though the doctor reminded me to rest for several days and to return immediately if the pain worsened. I nodded through all of it, grateful in a practical way to be discharged, but also unsettled. Leaving meant re-entering my life. The same life that now felt different because I finally saw it clearly. A rideshare brought me back to my apartment in Columbus. The air outside was cold, crisp enough that I could see my breath as I stepped to the curb. My small place felt unfamiliar when I opened the door. Maybe it was simply the contrast with the hospital, or maybe it was because my understanding of what this space represented had shifted. I was used to coming home alone, but I had never felt it as sharply as I did that morning. I rested for 2 days, moving slowly, drinking water, answering a few work-related messages from colleagues checking in. I ignored every family text. The silence from my end did not deter them. Lydia sent pictures of floral arrangements and bridesmaid dress options. Mom asked if I felt better yet, then quickly followed it with more wedding updates. Dad sent a single message with no punctuation that simply read, "Get well soon." I stared at it longer than I should have. By the third day, cabin fever had crept in, and the familiar part of me that needed structure tugged me back toward work. I was not on shift for another week, but I wanted to stop by the ER. It was part curiosity and part comfort. The emergency room had always been a place where my strength was respected, rather than taken for granted, where people leaned on me because they needed me, not because it was convenient to ignoring. The ER at Riverside was busy when I walked in. Alarms chirped. Nurses moved with purpose. A paramedic crew unloaded a patient through the bay doors. The smell of antiseptic and adrenaline mixed together in a way I had always found strangely grounding. Jonah Miller spotted me first. He was leaning over a workstation typing into a chart. His dark hair pulled back, a coffee cup balanced precariously beside him. When he saw me, he straightened and let out a breath. "You are supposed to be resting." His voice carried just enough teasing to soften the concern underneath. I held up my hands. "I am not here to work. I just needed to move around." "Cabin fever." He studied my face, then nodded. "How is the pain manageable?" I stepped closer to the desk. "How is the shift?" Jonah grimaced and gestured toward room 8. "You picked an interesting morning. We got an older gentleman in with dehydration and confusion. His daughter brought him in, then left 5 minutes later because she had a brunch reservation." I closed my eyes briefly. That familiar ache returned, not physical this time. I asked quietly, "Did she say when she is coming back?" Jonah snorted. "She said, 'Call me if it is serious.'" His eyebrows lifted. "He is 82. He lives alone. How much more serious does she need to be?" I swallowed and nodded. This was not unusual. Families assumed hospitals could substitute for presence. They assumed nurses would fill the gaps. We often did, but the gaps still hurt. Jonah leaned against the counter. "You're doing okay, for real." I hesitated. He had been my colleague for years. He had seen me cry once when a child coding did not make it. He knew the difference between distraction and honesty. I finally said my sister left the hospital before my procedure. She had wedding stuff. I kept my tone even, almost clinical, as if stating a diagnosis rather than a personal truth. Jonah stared at me for a long moment. His jaw tightened. He said quietly, "You deserved better." The words hit harder than they should have. I nodded once and changed the subject, because the weight of the conversation made something inside me feel unsteady. Before I left, I checked on the older gentleman in room 8. I stood by his bed, adjusted his blanket, and spoke softly until his breathing eased. His daughter did not return during the time I was there. It was not my family, not my story, but the parallel was too sharp to ignore. By the time I returned home, a new message from Lydia waited on my phone. Hey, super quick question. Can I store a few wedding things in your extra room? Only temporary. You travel so much you probably will not even notice. My heart dropped. The timing was almost comical if it had not been so familiar. I sat on the couch and read the message again. She did not ask how I felt. She did not ask how recovery was going. She wanted space. My space. Because it was convenient. And apparently empty. I typed a reply, paused, deleted it. I tried again and kept it short. What things? She responded instantly. Just decorations, favors, maybe a couple dresses. Nothing big. Andrew's place is too full, and Mom and Dad have guests next week. You know how crazy wedding season is. Also, I think you still have a spare key somewhere. If not, I can get another copy made. The room felt suddenly smaller. I sat still, phone in hand, breathing slowly. I thought of the recovery bed, the empty chair, the smiling faces in the family chat, and now this as if nothing had happened at all. I wrote back, I will be home. Do not come by until I say. She sent a thumbs up emoji. The next afternoon, I walked into my apartment and froze. Boxes were stacked in the hallway. Large plastic tubs filled the spare room. A rolling rack with dresses leaned against the wall. My neatly arranged space was crowded with pastel ribbons, centerpieces wrapped in tissue, and garment bags with bridesmaid names written in marker. Lydia was standing in the middle of the room holding a clipboard, talking to herself as she checked items off a list. She jumped when she saw me. Oh, hey, you are early. She smiled like nothing was wrong. Do you love it? I know it looks like a lot, but I swear it is only for a couple days. I figured you would not mind because you travel so often. I stood in the doorway, a wave of disbelief washing over me. Did you let yourself in? Lydia blinked. You left a key at Mom and Dad's a while ago for emergencies. Remember? And I figured since you were in the hospital, you would not be home for a bit. I swallowed hard. I felt the soreness in my side pulse. My voice was flat. You put your wedding storage in my home without asking. She waved a hand. Mia, come on. You are overthinking this. You are always so independent. You do not need the space. I am drowning in planning, and you know how much this wedding means. I knew you would understand. There it was again, the phrase she relied on whenever she wanted something. I knew you would understand. A quiet anger rose slow and steady. It was not explosive. It was the kind that had been building for years without a voice. I stepped fully into the room. You need to move your things out. Lydia blinked again, this time confused. What? Why, I thought you would be supportive. You always are. And I am stressed, Mia. Really stressed. This wedding is a huge deal for our whole family. I crossed my arms more to ground myself than to appear firm. You have 1 week to remove everything. And I want my key back. Her mouth fell open. Are you serious? You know I am dealing with a million things. You know I do not have room anywhere else. Mom said you would help me. She said you would not make a fuss. The familiar sting hit my chest. Mom said. Lydia's voice sharpened. I cannot believe you are doing this to me right now. After everything I am handling. After everything this wedding means. I thought you of all people would not make it harder. I kept my voice calm. Lydia. I just had an emergency procedure. I came home to find my apartment full of your things. You did not ask. You assumed. And I'm setting a boundary. 1 week. She stared at me as if seeing someone she did not recognize. You are being dramatic. Once that word would have shut me down. I would have apologized, smoothed things over, convinced myself I was overreacting. Not anymore. I took a slow breath. 1 week. And the key. Silence stretched. Lydia finally exhaled sharply, grabbed her purse, and muttered that she would talk to me later when I was thinking clearly. She brushed past me, pulling the door hard behind her. When the room finally went still, I looked at the stacks of boxes in the spare room. The clutter felt symbolic, physical proof of every time my space, my needs. My feelings had been the last consideration. I stepped back, closed the door, and let my hand rest on the knob for a moment. Something steady formed inside me. The faint outline of a boundary. The first one I had ever placed between Lydia and me. Not a wall, but a line. a line I was finally ready to hold. I did not yet know what the coming days would bring or how my family would react. But as I walked back into the living room, still sore, still healing, I felt something shift in a way I could not ignore. I had asked for my key back, and for the first time, I had not apologized for wanting something that belonged to me. That thought stayed with me long after Lydia slammed the door behind her. I stood in the quiet of my apartment, listening to the faint hum of the heater and the distant sound of someone taking their dog down the hallway. The boxes in the spare room remained untouched, sitting there like an echo of a lifetime of expectations I had finally stepped away from. I sank onto the couch, carefully mindful of the lingering ache in my side. The doctor had warned me that residual pain from the kidney stone procedure might last several days. He had not mentioned how strange it would feel to be back in my own home, looking at everything differently. It was like someone had lifted a sheet of fog from around me, and the shapes of my life were sharper than before. I kept thinking about Lydia's voice, that familiar mix of entitlement and confidence, the assumption that my life was always available to fit around hers. I thought about how she had said I was making things difficult for her. On the heels of her leaving me in a hospital bed, terrified and alone, she thought I was the one complicating her life. I let out a slow breath, pressing a hand lightly to my stomach as if grounding myself. Over the next few days, I rested, occasionally checking messages from work or reading articles online, anything to keep my mind occupied. What surprised me most was how quiet the family group chat had become. Lydia sent one short message asking if I was still planning to let her retrieve the decorations over the weekend, but that was it. Mom sent me a link to a wedding hairstyle Lydia was trying, with no mention of how I felt or how I was healing. Dad sent another short message that read, "Hope you are getting better." The silence said more than any long apology ever could. On the fourth morning after the confrontation with Lydia, I woke up before sunrise. The sky outside had just begun to take on a faint blue glow, and the usual winter chill rose through the window pane. I brewed a cup of tea and settled near the window wrapped in a blanket. I watched the street below where snow from the night before still dusted the sidewalks glowing under the soft, early light. Something quiet but steady formed inside me, the same way I felt before making an important decision at work. The feeling came when I knew what needed to be done, even if it was difficult. I reached for my phone. I opened Facebook and stared at the blank post window. My heart began beating harder, not from panic, but from resolve. This was not impulsive. I had sat with the pain long enough to understand it was real, and I was done shaping myself around the comfort of others. I began typing. Slowly at first, then faster. I wrote the date, the exact time I arrived in the ER, the symptoms that sent me there. The diagnosis of an obstructive kidney stone is complicated by infection. I wrote the words the doctor had said, that the situation was urgent and required immediate intervention. I wrote what I heard when I was behind the curtain. I included the sentence I had heard Lydia say with my own ears. "Let's go back home. She will be fine. She has a procedure. I have wedding planning." I typed that my family left before the consent forms were signed. I typed that no one stayed, not even for the moment before sedation, not even long enough for the nurse to ask who my emergency contact was. I kept every sentence factual. No embellishment, no anger. Just the truth laid down cleanly and plainly. Then I attached a photo of my hospital wristband taken the morning after the procedure. The date and timestamp were visible. I also added a screenshot of Lydia's Instagram story, the one she had posted from the cake tasting appointment. The timestamp on it overlapped almost exactly with the moment the nurse had been prepping me for sedation. I ended the post with a single factual line. This was the day my family chose their priorities, and now I am choosing mine. I read the post several times. My hands were slightly cold, but my breathing was steady. I changed the privacy setting to public. I did not tag anyone. I did not hide it either. I tapped the schedule button instead of post. A small window popped up and asked for the date and time. I selected the morning of Lydia's wedding, the exact day she had chosen as the pinnacle of her priorities, the day she wanted the world to celebrate her. The day she would be surrounded by people who believed she was thoughtful and loving and generous. The scheduled time blinked up at me from the screen, 9:30 in the morning. I sat there for a moment staring at it. My thumb hovered over the confirm button, not from hesitation, but from the weight of what that small tap represented. For my entire life, I had stayed quiet. I had excused, softened, protected, mended, carried. And every time I had believed silence kept the peace. But silence had only erased me. I thought of the hospital room again, the empty chair. The nurse asked who was staying. My family walked away with no more concern than checking off an errand on a list. I thought of the patient in room 8 whose daughter left him in the ER because she had brunch. I thought of Lydia's voice, casual and assured, telling my parents I would understand. I understood too well. I tapped confirm. A soft vibration acknowledged the scheduled post. Then I powered off my phone completely. The screen went black, reflecting my own face back at me. Calm, steady, not triumphant, just resolved. I set the phone down and drew the blanket around my shoulders. Outside, the sun slowly edged above the horizon, turning the snow into a sheet of glowing white. Cars began moving along the street, their tires crunching softly. A neighbor's dog barked once and fell silent again. The world was waking up, but inside my apartment, everything felt still. I realized then that I was not doing this to punish Lydia. I was not doing it to embarrass anyone. I was doing it because the truth mattered. And because telling the truth had always been something I avoided when it might make someone uncomfortable. But discomfort was not cruelty. Silence was. For the first time in my adult life, I felt the slowing release of something heavy that I had carried without questioning. I took a long sip of my tea, letting the warmth fill my chest. The wedding day was only a few days away. I had no idea how the post would be received or who would see it. I did not even know if my family would care. But I did know one thing with absolute certainty. I was done being the one who understood. I finally understood myself instead. And as I sat by the window watching the steady spread of light across Columbus, I felt an unfamiliar but welcome sense of peace settle through me. No turning back now, just truth waiting for its morning. The woman near the window shifted in her seat as the flight attendants moved up the aisle with their final checks. I kept my phone powered off, tucked deep into my bag, my fingers resting on the zipper as if holding it closed would keep me from second-guessing myself. The plane felt warm and still, almost suspended, while outside the January morning in Columbus looked pale and washed out. I knew that somewhere across the city, guests were already arriving at the vineyard Lydia had chosen months earlier. I also knew that at 9:30 in the morning my post had gone live. The aircraft pushed back from the gate. The engines hummed louder, a familiar vibration traveling beneath my feet. I closed my eyes and let the sound settle into me. It was strange how calm I felt now that the moment could no longer be undone. I had not sabotaged anything. I had not lied. I had only stopped holding a weight that never belonged to me. The wheels lifted off the runway, and the pressure of takeoff pressed gently against my chest. Within minutes, Columbus disappeared into clouds, fading into soft gray below us. I leaned my head back, letting my breath find its own rhythm again. For the first time in years, my absence was not an accident. It was a choice, a deliberate clearing of space where I had once forced myself into the background. While the plane settled into the sky, the vineyard outside Columbus began to shift from morning calm into murmurs and movement. Guests walked along the gravel paths between rows of dormant vines. Heaters glowed beneath the white ceremony tent. Staff carried trays of sparkling cider and champagne. The winter air was crisp, but anticipation kept people warm. Lydia had always wanted an outdoor wedding even in January, and no one had dared question her vision. The Carter family had spared no expense either. Soft string lights hung across wide beams. Every table was draped in cream linen. Everything was arranged to create the perfect backdrop, except I was not there. The first questions surfaced quietly, carried in polite tones by people who meant no harm. Where's the bride's sister? I thought she was a bridesmaid. Is she running? Late Lydia brushed past two of her bridesmaids with a tight smile and a narrowed glance. She forced her voice light when she answered. Mia got called away for work. You know how nurses are. Always something urgent. But the words came out curt, clipped, as if she could not quite hide the annoyance under her breath. The bridesmaids exchanged looks but did not push. Lydia continued adjusting her earrings while her makeup artist hovered with a spray bottle. Her jaw tightened each time her phone buzzed on the counter. She had not checked those messages, not yet. In another corner of the vineyard, the Carter family gathered near a cluster of reserved chairs. Andrew's mother, Margaret Blake, stood with two of her sisters, all dressed in shades of navy. They spoke quietly about the morning, waiting for the ceremony coordinator to call them to their seats. One of Margaret's nieces approached, holding her phone with a troubled expression. "Did you see this?" She lowered her voice, but not enough. "It is about Mia." Margaret looked up confused. "Mia, the nurse. She is a sweet girl. What about her?" The niece hesitated, then angled the phone toward Margaret. She had opened my public Facebook post. The photo of my hospital wristband stood at the top. The timestamp from my emergency procedure. The details about the obstructive kidney stone and the infection that had spread too fast. My words about Lydia leaving. And beneath it, a cropped screenshot of Lydia's wedding cake tasting story, posted during the same hour. Margaret's brows knit together. "Who posted this, Mia?" "It is public." Margaret read it twice, her expression shifting from confusion into a quiet, sharp concern. She looked across the vineyard toward the bridal cottage where Lydia was, getting ready. "Did Andrew know about this?" The niece shook her head. "I do not think so. But half the guests are reading it. It is spreading." Behind them, another cluster of guests began whispering. Someone muttered that they could not believe the bride had left her sister during emergency surgery. Someone else wondered aloud how a family could walk out of an ER. The sound of murmured disbelief rolled through the seating area in soft waves. Inside the bridal cottage, Lydia finally picked up her ringing phone and frowned at the screen. "Mom has called 5 times, Dad twice. Why are they blowing up my phone today?" She silenced it and turned back to the mirror. But a minute later, the coordinator knocked lightly on the cottage door. "Lydia, I am sorry to interrupt, but a few guests are asking about your sister. They seem confused." Lydia let out a breath through her nose. "She has work in Seattle. I already said that." "Why is everyone so obsessed with Mia today?" The coordinator hesitated as if trying to find a gentle way to say something delicate. "I am not sure, but I believe there is a post circulating online." Lydia froze. "A post? What kind of post?" The coordinator lifted her hands helplessly. "I do not know the details. But people are talking." Lydia dismissed her sharply and reached for her phone again. She stared at the notifications that filled her screen, but did not open any of them. Instead, she put the phone down and grabbed her bouquet. Outside, Mom and Dad had moved toward the bridal tent. Mom looked pale and strained as she leaned close to Dad. "I cannot reach her." "Why is she not answering?" Dad kept his eyes on the ground. "Let it go for now. We can talk to her later." Mom shook her head in frustration. "No, something feels wrong. This is exactly the kind of thing Lydia cannot handle. What if this ruins the wedding?" Dad pressed his lips together. "The wedding is already starting. We will deal with it afterward." Mom exhaled sharply and stepped aside as more guests arrived. Her gaze scanned the crowd, searching for someone who might offer clarity. But every face she saw seemed to carry the same unsettled curiosity. By the time Lydia walked toward the tent, her shoulders lifted high and defensively. Her smile was too tight. Her steps are too brisk. The bridesmaids hurried behind her. As she approached the front rows, Margaret stepped slightly into her path. "Lydia, may I ask you something important?" The tone alone made Lydia stop. "What is it?" Margaret held her gaze steady and calm. "Why was your sister alone in the hospital?" Lydia blinked hard. "What are you talking about?" Margaret glanced around at her sisters who stood nearby. Then she looked back at Lydia. "There is a post that many guests have seen. It says that Mia was taken into emergency care and that the family left her there, alone." Lydia's jaw flexed. "She is exaggerating. It was not that serious. She is a nurse. She understands what is routine. This wedding only happens once. It is not like she was dying." The words fell out of her mouth too fast, too loud, too practiced. Margaret's eyes sharpened. "Routine. The post says she had an infection. Is that routine to you?" Lydia looked away. Her throat tightened. "It was handled. And Mia is always fine. Everyone knows that." Margaret did not respond. The silence around them grew thick. One of the Carter aunts exchanged a meaningful look with another. Someone nearby whispered, "She actually said that out loud." Someone else murmured, "Poor Mia." That girl deserved better. Lydia felt the shift in the air like a drop in temperature. People were no longer looking at her with admiration. The softened gazes she expected before walking down the aisle were being replaced with stone stillness, polite shock, and a kind of quiet judgment she had never experienced. The ceremony began moments later, but the mood was already fractured. The string quartet played. Guests stood. Lydia walked down the aisle in her fitted lace gown. The dress sparkled under the winter sun, just as she had imagined it. But the applause did not come. Guests only stood and watched silently, some stiff, some hesitant, some still glancing at their phones. No warmth, no celebration, not even a smile from Margaret, who folded her hands tightly and looked directly at her son with an expression that said she had questions he needed to ask. Andrew tried to smile at Lydia, but something in his eyes seemed unsettled. He kept looking over the guests, then back at his fiancée. His jaw was tense. The officiant began speaking, but the energy inside the tent felt like it was sinking heavy and restrained. Guests shifted in their seats. A few cleared their throats. One older couple stood quietly and slipped out the side of the tent farqueado. Vows began. Lydia saw them leave. Her face tightened. When the moment came for the guests to respond to the traditional question, no one moved. No light laughter. No fond sighs. Just stillness. The ceremony continued, but each line felt hollow. The vows echoed in a space where celebration was supposed to live. Even the air seemed colder. By the time the officiant announced the marriage, the applause sounded like a scattered drizzle instead of a wave. Sparse. Obligatory. Thin. Lydia felt the chill from the guests as she and Andrew walked back down the yeshut aisle. She forced a smile, but there was something stiff and brittle in her expression. Behind them, murmurs filled the air again like an undercurrent no one could stop. During all of it, my phone remained powered off in a dark bag beneath an airplane seat a feet above the country. Mom called me again. Dad texted twice. Guests whispered about me. And somewhere in that vineyard, Lydia spoke the same words she had spoken behind a curtain in an ER while I was fighting an infection. She is a nurse. She will be fine. This wedding only happens once. But this time, she said it loudly enough for the people she wanted to impress most to hear. Her. And they did. By the time the plane began to descend toward Seattle, I felt only the faintest curiosity about what I would find on my phone once I landed. No dread. No guilt. Just a quiet certainty. The truth had finally stopped being mine alone to carry. I rested my head against the seat as the wheels touched down. The impact was soft, almost unremarkable. A natural ending to a long morning I had once feared would break me. But somehow, somewhere between Columbus and Seattle, I realized something simple. I had not ruined anything. I had removed myself from a story that no longer needed me to hold it together, and the world had kept turning anyway. I took a steady breath and waited for the seatbelt sign to turn off, ready to step into the next part of my life without looking back. The first whispers started near the front rows, where a few of Lydia's co-workers were seated. One woman leaned toward another and said she saw something online that she was not sure she should mention. Someone else asked where the bride's sister was. Another guest said she thought the sister was in Seattle for work but did not know why. Little pockets of conversations began to rise and fall across the vineyard, like shifting patches of wind. I did not know any of this yet. I was still somewhere above the country, the engines humming steadily as the plane cut through a smooth pocket of air. My eyes were closed, but I was not asleep. I was replaying the feeling of pressing that confirm button. It had not been dramatic. It had been quiet, almost gentle, like placing a stone exactly where it needed to go. Back in Ohio, the morning sun hit the vineyard just right, spreading a pale gold over the rows of bare vines and long banquet tables, decorated with candles and soft flowers. The guests were beginning to settle in, some taking photos, others fanning themselves lightly in the cold winter breeze. Margaret Blake, Andrew's mother, made her way toward the bridal suite with a tight, polite smile that had already been strained by the murmurs she heard among the guests. She held a gold silk shawl around her shoulders and walked with the calm confidence of a woman who had spent decades hosting family events and knew when something was off. Inside the suite, Lydia was sitting in front of a full-length mirror as the makeup artist applied a soft shade of lipstick. Her hair was curled perfectly pulled half back with delicate pearl pins. She was radiant in a way that photographs would love. She glanced at herself from different angles and smiled as if the world were exactly what she deserved it to be. Mom stood near the window smoothing her dress for the 5th time. She glanced at her phone with the same anxious flick she had done all morning. Dad was in the corner, his hands clasped behind him, staring at the floor as if counting carpet fibers. When Margaret entered, the air shifted. Lydia smiled brightly and stood, taking slow, careful steps not to crease her gown. "Margaret, you made it." She reached out to hug her future mother-in-law. "Is everything set outside?" Margaret did not return the smile. Her eyes searched the room. "Where is Mia?" The question landed sharply. I could almost imagine the air tightening even from miles above. Lydia blinked. "Mia? She is busy. Traveling, working. She always is. She knows how important today is." Margaret stepped closer, lowering her voice but not enough to hide the firmness in her tone. "I have had several guests approach me this morning. They said Mia posted something online. Something serious." Mom stiffened. Dad's shoulders rose slightly as if bracing for a sound that never came. Lydia waved her hand in a casual sweep that had always gotten her out of commitments she did not want to deal with. "I am sure it is nothing. You know Mia. She can be a bit dramatic when she feels overwhelmed. But she is fine. The hospital told us she was fine. It was just a kidney stone thing." Margaret's brows lifted. Her voice stayed steady, low, unwavering. "A kidney stone thing." Lydia shifted, smoothing the bodice of her gown. "Yes, she gets these medical things. Mia is a nurse. She knows what is routine and what is not. We had appointments that day. Important stuff. This wedding took months of planning." Margaret paused. Her expression did not change, but the temperature in the room dropped a degree. "Your future husband's aunt showed me a post from Mia. She said Mia had an infection and required an emergency procedure." Mom's face went pale. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "Lydia, did you tell her it was routine?" Before Lydia could speak, the door opened and 2 more women entered, both relatives of the Carter family. One of them, Andrew's older sister, held her phone in her hand with the screen illuminated. "Is this true, Lydia?" Her voice was not loud, but it carried the kind of firm expectation that demanded honesty. Lydia let out an exhale, already rolling her eyes before a single word escaped. "Look, this is getting blown out of proportion." She really was fine. Emergency rooms always sound dramatic. Nurses know how to handle those things, and Mia handles everything. She does not need people hovering over her. But weddings happen once. Only once. I had fittings and cake tastings, and the caterer was only available one day. Dad stepped forward slightly. "Lydia." But Lydia was on a rhythm now, repeating the logic she had used for years, the same justification she had used behind that curtain at the ER. I could hear her voice again almost as vividly as I had heard it that day. "She is strong. She knows the routine. She will be fine." Margaret's expression shifted not to anger but to something colder, something disappointed, something that might take years to unsee. She spoke clearly, a little louder this time. "So your sister was alone for an emergency medical procedure because you needed to taste cake." Lydia's chest rose quickly. She lifted her chin, trying to hold on to the version of events she preferred. "I had responsibilities. This wedding cost money and time. And Mia is always fine. She always bounces back. She never asks for help. She knows how much today means for our families." One of the Carter relatives exchanged a look with Margaret, a look that said everything without a word spoken. It said, "This is who she is." It said we need to reconsider what we know. It said we just heard the truth without needing to raise our voices. Mom took a shaky step toward Lydia. "Sweetheart, maybe you should slow down." Dad's voice was quiet. "Lydia, stop." But Lydia was too focused on salvaging her image. Her voice rose slightly brittle, defensive. "I cannot be the villain for choosing my wedding. Mia would understand if she cared about me the way I care about her. She knows this day is the most important day of my life. She knows she is strong enough to handle a little hospital visit." One of the women inhaled sharply. Another whispered to Margaret. The makeup artist quietly gathered her equipment and stepped to the wall, giving space to whatever was unfolding. Margaret's tone stayed calm, but something in it made everyone stand still. "Lydia, I lost my sister 10 years ago. She died from a complication no one expected. There are no routine emergencies, and I would have given anything to have been there for her." Lydia froze. Margaret took another step closer. "My son is about to marry you, and this family deserves to know the truth about what kind of woman he is. Marrying." Mom covered her mouth. Dad stared at the floor again. But his face was flushed with something that looked like shame. Lydia opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Outside, the string quartet continued to tune their instruments. Guests continued to whisper. A few had quietly left after seeing the post. Others stayed but shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. The atmosphere had changed. The excitement had dimmed. Something had settled over the vineyard like a thin layer of frost. When the ceremony finally began, the aisle felt colder than usual. Mom and Dad walked out stiffly. Andrew waited at the altar, his smile faltering when he saw the expressions on his family members' faces. Margaret stood near him, hands clasped, her eyes focused on Lydia with a look he had never seen before. The guests quieted as Lydia appeared at the top of the aisle. She was beautiful, glowing everything a bride should be, but there was a tension in her shoulders, a tightness in her smile. Her steps were graceful, but her eyes darted to the left and right, as if searching for someone to validate her. No one clapped as she walked. Not a single person. People watched. They did not celebrate. You could feel it. The subtle withdrawal of admiration. The shift from warm anticipation to cool observation. The kind of silence that reveals things no speech ever could. When she reached the altar, Andrew took her hands. His voice was low enough that only those closest could hear. "Lydia, is there something you need to tell me?" Her smile faltered. It stayed on her face, but it no longer reached her eyes. She shook her head, slightly squeezing his hands. "Everything is fine. My sister just posted something misleading. She is dramatic about pain. You know her." Margaret inhaled sharply behind him. The officiant cleared his throat and began the ceremony. But the energy was gone. Not a single laugh rose at the light-hearted lines. The audience did not shift forward with excitement. A few people glanced at one another in quiet disbelief. The moment came when the officiant invited the guests to show their support for the couple. Usually a line that prompted applause, but this time there was nothing, not even scattered claps, just a chill that rolled through the rows like a slow tide. Lydia's face tensed. She smiled wider, forced, almost desperate. Andrew looked at his mother. Margaret's expression did not change, but her eyes spoke volumes. When the vows were exchanged, a few guests dropped their gaze, unable to fully celebrate a moment shadowed by truths that had been too long ignored. By the time they kissed, several chairs were already empty. People had slipped out quietly. No cheers followed the kiss. No joyful exhale of relief or excitement. Only polite, clipped applause from a handful of people too polite to do otherwise. Lydia looked out over the guests. Her face trembled slightly, just enough for Mom to reach for her hand. But even Mom looked rattled, shaken in a way I had never seen. The ceremony ended with a stiffness that did not belong at a wedding. Guests rose slowly. Conversations were whispered, not shared. People avoided Lydia's eyes. The truth had done what truth always does. It was revealed. Not loudly, not cruelly, just unmistakably. And while I was still miles above the ground, somewhere between Ohio and Washington, the world Lydia had carefully curated for herself began to shift. Not because I had forced it, but because she had handed the world her own words. She said it again, out loud, the very sentence that had broken something inside me behind that curtain at the ER. "She is strong. She will be fine. My wedding comes first." She said it in front of the people she needed to admire her, and they heard it exactly the way I had heard it, the way it truly was. When the ceremony ended, the cold remained. People walked to the reception tent slowly, uncertain. The music played, but the joy did not rise with it. Karma had begun its quiet walk, and this time I was not there to soften the sound of its footsteps. Back in Ohio, the reception tent had been set up with long wooden tables and strings of soft lights draped across the ceiling. White candles flickered inside glass cylinders. Music floated through speakers as the band warmed up. On any other wedding day, this would have been the moment when joy finally broke open. Guests would mingle, laughter would fill the space, and the tension from the ceremony would melt away. But this time, silence stretched across the room like a thin layer of ice. People entered slowly in pairs or small groups, talking in low voices. Some guests avoided eye contact with one another. Others kept glancing at their phones, refreshing the same post again and again. A few whispered as Lydia and Andrew walked in, as if unsure whether to acknowledge them or wait for something else to unfold. Lydia lifted her chin, forcing a bright smile, the kind she used when she wanted to control a room without letting anyone see. She was rattled. She held Andrew's arm tightly. His expression was harder to read. He looked outwardly composed, but there was a tension in his jaw that had not been there before. Mom walked slightly behind them, wringing her hands. Dad followed with a stiff posture, his eyes fixed on the floor. From the back of the tent, Evan, venue coordinator, stepped forward. He had been directing staff around the vineyard all morning, smoothing out details, arranging flowers, adjusting table settings. But now his face had lost its usual easy calm. He waited until Lydia and Andrew were close before stepping into their path. "We need to talk." Lydia smiled tightly without stopping. "Andrew, not now. The reception is starting. We have things to do." He did not move aside. He glanced at Andrew, then back at Lydia. "I am going to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Did your sister go through an emergency procedure alone?" The air around them seemed to pause. Several guests nearby turned slightly, pretending not to listen, but leaning close enough to catch the response. Lydia's voice came out too quickly. "I told you Mia is fine. She is always fine. She understands how these things work. She is a nurse." Andrew's expression darkened. "That does not answer my question." Mom stepped forward. "Andrew, sweetheart, this is not the time." He did not look away from Lydia. "You told people she was dramatic. You told the makeup artist it was routine. You told my family she was exaggerating. But the Post says she had an infection and an urgent procedure, and that you all left her alone. That is not dramatic. That is medical reality." Andrew's eyes shifted between them. He swallowed. "Lydia, is it true?" She tried to laugh. A short, breathy sound that cracked at the edges. "Everyone is making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. Mia knows how to manage pain. She knows emergencies. I had one day to do fittings and tastings. This wedding cost money. It affects both families. I had responsibilities. Mia has her work. She knows her place." Andrew took a small step back as if the words physically struck him. Her place. The phrase hung there in the cold air, sharp and unmistakable. Andrew's face tightened. "Lydia." She began straightening the skirt of her gown with hurried movements. "I cannot keep explaining this. Mia chose today to do whatever she did online. She wanted attention. She is jealous or angry or something else. But I cannot spend my wedding day apologizing because my sister wants to take the spotlight." The nearest group of guests turned away, uncomfortable. Andrew spoke softly this time. "I have known Mia longer than I have known you. She has never wanted the spotlight. She barely accepts help. She never asks for attention. What she posted was not dramatic. It was honest." Lydia huffed. "This is ridiculous. I am your sister. You should be on my side." Andrew's voice stayed level, but it cut through the room. "Being on your side does not mean accepting lies you tell yourself." A murmur rippled through the guests. Mom touched Lydia's arm. "Honey, maybe we should step outside for a moment." Lydia jerked away. "No, I am not ruining my wedding because Mia cannot let something go." Andrew finally spoke, his voice low enough that only the people closest could hear. "Lydia, someone who abandons their sister during an emergency is not the victim here. You need to take responsibility." She stiffened. "So you are taking her side now?" Silence settled like a weight. Meanwhile, miles away, my plane had started its smooth descent towards Seattle. The pilot announced our approach. Passengers adjusted trays and buckled belts. I watched the clouds thin and break apart, revealing the faint blue of the Pacific Northwest winter sky. Rain streaked the window as we dipped lower. My phone remained powered off. I had no idea that my name had become the quiet center of an unwelcome storm. Back in Ohio, I did not know that people were leaving the vineyard early, stepping outside to talk about what happened, some even reading the post aloud to others. I did not know that a few guests quietly slipped out of the tent entirely, choosing not to participate in a celebration that felt tainted by something ugly beneath its polished surface. What I did know was that my silence felt like the first real breath I had. taken in years. Back at the vineyard, dinner began, or attempted to begin. Plates were served, but half the tables barely touched their food. Conversations never settled into a rhythm. People exchanged glances that Lydia pretended not to see. When she and Andrew walked table to table greeting guests, many smiled politely but kept their responses short, their eyes drifting. One older cousin whispered to another as Lydia passed. Someone else whispered to Andrew's aunt. A few people shifted their chairs to create distance. The applause that usually accompanied speeches was muted or non-existent. The maid of honor gave a short toast about love and sisterhood. A line she intended to be charming hung in the air like a stone dropped into still water. To those who show up for us through everything. Someone in the back coughed sharply. A few guests looked down into their laps. Andrew's aunt blinked slowly and took a sip of her wine. Lydia forced a laugh, but her jaw was tight. The microphone was handed to Andrew. He stood, glanced at Lydia, then at the room. His voice was even. "Thank you all for being here. Today has been harder than we expected, but I appreciate everyone who came and everyone who supports honesty and accountability in relationships." Lydia grabbed his arm. "Andrew, what are you doing?" He did not answer. He returned the microphone and sat down. Mom's face had gone pink and blotchy. Dad stared straight ahead as if focusing on a fixed point beyond the tent. Somewhere during the slow unraveling of the evening, my phone began filling with calls. They went unanswered. They went straight to voicemail. Mom left 5 messages. Her voice climbed with each one moving from anxious to stern to pleading. "Mia, call me back. Please. This is not the way. People are talking. You need to take that post down. You are making a scene. You are hurting your sister." Another message followed. "This has gone too far. You are being unkind. We did what we thought was right." Dad sent a voicemail which lasted only a few seconds. "Call your mother. She is upset. We can talk later." I would not hear them until much later that night. By then, they would carry the weight of something I had already decided I was not willing to carry for them anymore. The plane touched down in Seattle with a soft jolt. The runway lights streaked past. Passengers reached for their phones, waking screens with chimes and vibrations. I kept mine off and waited until the plane reached the gate. When I finally turned it on, the screen lit with a flood of missed calls. But I felt no panic, no sinking dread, only clarity. The voicemail icons blinked like small warnings I no longer felt responsible for. I scrolled past them calmly, almost gently. Then I opened my contacts. It took me only a few seconds to find the listing labeled Emergency Contact. My own name had been followed by Mom and Dad for as long as I could remember. They had been the ones the hospital called in case anything happened. They were the ones who should have been there behind that curtain. They were the ones who had walked away. I tapped edit. I deleted their names. Then I typed in Paige's number instead. She answered my calls at midnight. She came to my apartment without asking. She grabbed groceries when I was sick. She stayed on the phone with me after double shifts. She showed up. A small confirmation message appeared at the top of the screen. Contact updated. I stared at it for a moment. A warmth spread through my chest. Not joy exactly. Something quieter. Relief. Lightness. The feeling of stepping out of a shadow so long I forgot I lived inside it. I whispered into the empty space of the airport cabin, barely audible, as if speaking the truth made it more real. I am not theirs to abandon anymore. And as the last passengers filed out of the plane and the Seattle air drifted, in through the open cabin door I gathered my things, stood, and stepped forward into a life I was finally choosing for myself. By the time I stepped into the cool Seattle air and felt the damp wind brush across my face, something inside me had shifted. I could not name it yet, but I knew it was not going to shift back. 6 months passed after that day, slow at first, then with a kind of steady momentum that surprised me. Life in Columbus faded into the background like a landscape seen from a moving train, growing smaller and less defined the farther I traveled. I did not plan for it to happen that way. But once distance grows, it rarely shrinks on its own. I moved between contracts, spending 8 weeks in Seattle, then 6 in Portland, then another short rotation in Denver. Each new city steadied me in a way I had not expected. The rhythm of work filled the empty spaces where anxiety used to live. Long shifts kept my mind focused. Quiet studio apartments in each new city helped me breathe without feeling watched or obligated. I called Paige often. She was my anchor when everything else still felt foggy. She checked in without suffocating me, listened without pushing solutions. Let me talk through whatever memories surfaced that week. Sometimes the memories were small. Sometimes they were sharp. Still, life kept opening. Work became something I looked forward to again. I found myself volunteering for patient follow-ups, taking extra time with older patients who reminded me of the man in the ER who had thanked me for simply seeing him. I let myself rediscover the part of nursing that had drawn me in to begin with, the part where care meant presence, not perfection. Around the third month, I also met someone at a coffee shop in Seattle. His name was Daniel. He was an ER physician assistant who ordered the same drink I did and carried, the same tired look I recognized in the mirror after a 12-hour shift. Our first conversation had been awkward and simple. Our second lasted almost an hour. By the fourth time we talked, I realized I was not bracing myself for hurt. I was not shrinking or apologizing. I was not trying to be the easy one or the strong one or the person who made things smoother for everyone else. I was just myself. And he stayed. Meanwhile, back in Ohio, the consequences of that winter day grew like cracks in ice. The wedding story did not die down after the reception. It followed Lydia into real life, into her wedding photos, into her social circles. She stopped posting online for weeks. When she returned, her captions were stiffer, shorter, and missing the bright confidence she had once used like a shield. Her marriage felt the weight too. That much I heard through Paige and a few cousins who reached out quietly. Andrew had gone from confused to withdrawn, then from withdrawn to frustrated, then finally to question everything. According to one cousin, he had asked Lydia 2 months into their marriage why she had not simply said the words "I am sorry" without including a justification. It became a fight that lasted a week. She had told him he was overreacting. He had responded that he was tired of hearing her say Mia is dramatic instead of I was wrong. I did not feel satisfaction hearing that, not even a small spark of triumph. What I felt instead was distance, an understanding that their marriage was shaped by choices they made long before I posted anything at all. Socially, Lydia lost more than she expected. Friends who had once circled her slowly drifted away. They made excuses first, then they stopped making excuses. One by one, they became quieter. A few had seen the hospital post. A few had heard her own words from the vineyard. One friend had even called Paige privately, asking how I was doing because she felt guilty for not checking on me sooner. That alone told me more than Lydia ever could. Mom and Dad at first refused to see any of it. They had always collapsed when confronted with conflict, retreating into silence or telling themselves a prettier version of events. But this time things did not fade. People kept talking. Relatives asked questions. Margaret Blake did not drop the issue. Andrew spoke publicly about wanting transparency in his marriage. Dad could not hide from that. Mom could not soften it. 2 months after the wedding, I received a text from Mom while I was sitting in a small diner in Portland, eating scrambled eggs after a night shift. We want to talk. We are willing to start therapy if that is what you need. The words looked stiff, like she had rewritten them 4 or 5 times before sending. I did not answer immediately. I let the message sit there for days, visible each time I opened my phone, like a reminder of a story I used to live in and no longer wanted to return to. But eventually, after talking it through with Paige and thinking more honestly about what I wanted, I wrote back, "Therapy is the only way forward. I am not coming home until it begins." Mom replied later that evening, "We will schedule it." I did not ask for updates. I did not ask for proof. I simply waited. A month into their sessions, Dad sent an email. His words were brief but different from anything he had written before. He did not try to excuse anything. He did not call me strong. He did not ask me to start over. He wrote about his own silence, his avoidance, his fear of confronting conflict in our family. He wrote that he understood now how much that fear had cost me. He ended with, "I am trying. I hope I can show that to you in time." For the first time in years, I believed he might mean it. Lydia stayed quiet longer. She did not reach out. Not after the wedding. Not after Mom and Dad began therapy. Not after friends drifted from her. That silence was not surprising. Lydia had never been the one to apologize first. She waited for the world to adjust to her, not for herself to adjust to the world. But consequences do not adjust. They keep unfolding. I heard small updates from Paige occasionally. Someone had overheard Lydia complaining that married life was far more work than she expected. Someone else mentioned that Lydia kept snapping at Andrew, then crying afterward. One cousin said Lydia did not enjoy hosting anymore because she felt judged in her own home. I listened to these updates the way someone listens to weather reports from a place they once lived, distant, familiar, detached. Meanwhile, in my own life, things were settling in ways I never expected. Seattle began to feel like a place I could stay longer. I liked my small apartment with its worn hardwood floors and narrow window, overlooking a quiet street. I liked the smell of rain and coffee shops on every corner. I liked the idea of belonging to a place that had not seen the worst parts of my family. One evening near the end of my Seattle rotation, I sat in the break room with Daniel as we ate leftover stir-fry from a shift. Potluck. The room buzzed softly with the sounds of vending machines and distant hallway. Voices. He looked at me thoughtfully. "You seem lighter lately." I felt lighter. I had spent months not explaining myself, not smoothing over hurt feelings, not shrinking to make someone else more comfortable. For the first time in my life, I did not feel like someone who existed to absorb the impact of others. I finally felt like someone was building something. "Maybe I am," I said. He smiled. "I like seeing that. I liked being seen like that." By the time spring began pushing its way through Seattle, painting the trees outside my apartment in soft green buds, I realized I had not checked Lydia's social media in nearly 3 months. The thought startled me. I used to track every post as a way of knowing how she moved through the world, what she expected of me, where I needed to fit myself in. Now she does not occupy that space anymore. Then one Saturday evening, as I sat near my window watching the soft rain slide down the glass, my phone buzzed with a message notification. The name on the screen took my breath for a moment. Lydia. The text was short. "Mia. I know I have been quiet. I needed to think. I want to acknowledge what I did. I left you when you needed support. I should not have. I am sorry. No excuses. If you ever want to talk, I am here." I stared at the words for a long time. There was no blame, no justification, no mention of her wedding or her stress or the money she spent or the excuses she used like currency. Just an apology. It was the first one she had ever sent me in our entire lives. My chest tightened, not with pain, but with something gentler. Surprise, sadness, maybe a little hope. I did not answer. Not because I wanted to punish her. Not because I was angry. But because healing does not move faster just because someone finally decides to apologize. I needed to decide how her words fit into the life I was building, not the life I had stepped away from. I locked my phone and set it gently on the table beside me. Outside, the rain kept falling on the Seattle streets steady and calm, washing the night clean. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt no urgency to respond. For a long moment, I just stared at the rain sliding across my window, letting Lydia's message settle somewhere inside me that did not feel bruised anymore. I was not ready to answer her then, and that silence stayed in place for days. But something about the tone of her words stayed with me. Not heavy, not demanding, just there. A year passed before I finally knew what to do with it. The seasons in Seattle shifted gently through that year. Winter rain turned into a warmer spring drizzle, then a mild summer, then an autumn colored in burnt oranges and deep reds. My work moved steadily. My life stretched into something wider. I began to build habits that were mine alone. Morning walks to a bakery on the corner. Friday lunches with coworkers. Movie nights at Paige's place whenever I flew through Columbus for short breaks. Daniel and I kept talking even after I transferred out of Seattle. The conversations deepened in ways I did not expect. Gentle, patient, real. I learned what it felt like to be around someone who did not confuse strength with silence. My apartment became a kind of sanctuary. Small, quiet, mine. And during that year, something inside me softened just enough to consider the things I had once assumed I would never revisit. The first shift came in the form of a letter, not a text, not a voicemail. A real letter written on thick white paper, folded carefully into an envelope with my Ohio address crossed out and my Seattle forwarding address written beneath it in slightly shaky handwriting. Mom. Inside the note was only a page long, but every line carried weight. She wrote that therapy had not been easy for her. She wrote that the counselor had asked her questions she did not want to answer. Questions about favoritism, about silence, about why she had always assumed I did not need anything from her because I seemed fine on my own. She wrote that hearing her own words repeated back to her had felt like standing in a room she never realized was cold. And then she wrote the one thing I never expected. I failed you in ways I never admitted to myself. I cannot undo what I excused. I can only learn to show up before I'm asked. I read that line 3 times. Dad sent a message a week later. Shorter, simpler, but no less sincere. I should have stayed. I should have spoken. Silence is not love. I know that now. He added, I am trying to be better than the man who stayed behind that curtain. For the first time in years, I let myself believe he meant it. I still did not fly home. I still did not rush into forgiveness. But I placed those letters in a small wooden box I kept beside my bed, not to revisit the hurt, but because they were proof of something I had stopped hoping for. Growth. Lydia stayed quiet another month after sending her apology. And then, on an ordinary morning when I was standing in my kitchen sipping coffee before a shift, I finally felt steady enough to open her message again. Her words were still there. No excuses, no blame. For the first time in my life, my sister had not asked me to twist myself smaller to make room for her. Comfort. She had not asked me to share the blame. She had not insisted I misunderstood. She simply admitted she failed me. And that was the moment I realized I could finally respond. I sat at my small kitchen table, the early sunlight stretching across the floor, warming my bare feet. I let myself breathe once, twice, then began typing. Lydia, I accept your apology. I believe you meant it. But I am not ready to rebuild anything yet. I need more time. I need distance. I need to keep choosing myself before I choose any relationship that once asked me to disappear. I added one final sentence. Maybe someday, but not now. I pressed send. The message whooshed away, leaving a strange quiet behind. Not a cold one, not an angry one, just quiet. I had spent years pouring energy into fixing things my family refused to acknowledge. This time I did not owe anyone urgency. I only owed myself honesty. Weeks later, while waiting for my shift to start, I sat in the hospital cafeteria scrolling through articles on my phone. Nurses buzzed around me, lifting trays, laughing softly, talking about weekend plans. I felt something settle inside me that I had not felt in a long time. Steadiness. I opened the Notes app on my phone and began typing a reflection I had been carrying around for months. It was not meant for social media. Not at first. It was simply something I needed to say somewhere. The strong one is not a compliment. It is often a warning. It is what people call you when they want permission to stop showing up. It is what they use when they want to justify leaving your side. It is a title given to the person who absorbs the most and asks for the least. I paused and watched the words settle on the screen. Then I added more. I am learning now that I do not have to be the strong one to be loved. I can be human. I can have needs. I can have limits, and those limits do not make me difficult or dramatic. They make me whole. I saved the note thinking maybe someday I would share it. Maybe someone else needed to hear it. That someday came sooner than I expected. I started a small personal blog. Nothing professional, nothing polished, just a place to write. I called it What Strength Really Means. I posted pieces about burnout boundaries, emotional labor, and the way people often rely on the ones who seem steady until they collapse. I did not use my family's names. I did not reference anyone directly. I simply wrote about the experience of being overlooked while being labeled resilient. Within weeks, readers found it. Nurses, teachers, mothers, women who said they had spent decades carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations. People who had been told they were fine so often that they started believing their pain was an inconvenience. Their comments filled the page like small lanterns. I kept writing because each story reminded me that silence had never protected me. It had only kept me from myself. A year after the wedding, almost to the week, I posted a final reflection that closed the chapter I had spent months walking through. I wrote, I did not destroy my sister. I stopped disappearing for her comfort. That is the difference. And sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply choosing not to abandon yourself the way others once abandoned you. After posting it, I closed my laptop and stepped outside to sit on the small balcony outside my apartment. The Seattle sky was gray, soft, familiar. A light mist fell over the street below, catching the glow from the street lamps. I breathed in deeply, letting the cool air fill my chest. I had not built a perfect life. I had not magically healed every wound, but I had built a freer one, a truer one. And in that moment, I knew the story was no longer about what my family had done to me. It was about what I had finally learned to do for myself. I stood stretched and looked out over the city that had become my quiet beginning again. Then I went inside, picked up my phone, and recorded a short voice memo to myself. Choosing yourself is not an act of war. It is an act of survival. And with that, I let the night settle. Now, if you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this. Silence can be power and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.